Okay, folks, welcome to the pregame for Unfound on the Ground, number 31. This is the disappearance of Olga Mauger. It looks like Mauger, but it's pronounced Major, and I got that from Jake Nichols, Cowboy State Daily, 2023. That's a reference we'll be relying on. Of course, as you know, if you've watched any of these programs before, that I get here a little early to test the tech and to get a few things situated. And so I'm going to start with that again. If you're watching this after it's released, which will be at some point about a month, give or take, after we make it, then please, if you like this video, please like it. If you're not yet a subscriber to the Unfound Podcast YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe if you're someone that subscribes to YouTube channels. And then, of course, go ahead and share this video. Again, once it's out there and being distributed. We meet here with our premium members, our think tank members who participate in the making of these, and then they're released about a month out. I'm also going to, again, I'm always trying to make some tweaks in terms of maximizing the time. If you're newer to Unfound or you're not, let me also mention and just post here for you the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. That's the home for all things Unfound. Of course, Unfound is very active in its Facebook page, Facebook group, very active, really in many ways. Of course, the flagship, so to speak, is Ed Densel's program that he runs. It's the podcast, typically released on Fridays. The main episode, long form programming. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a sort of a spin-off program. This is now episode 31. Last episode we did, which will be released soon, was number 30, which was sort of a look back, time to review. And so again, if you're watching this, go ahead and like the video if you're inclined to do that. If you're not a subscriber to Unfound, the channel, go ahead and subscribe. And again, when this is released and you're watching this, please consider sharing it. I'm going to give some of my disclaimers now, just on the front end of the video. Eric Rybowski is my name. I am primarily, my main trade, so to speak, is a communication professor. But on the side, I do cold case journalism. I'm part of the Unfound assisting team. I've been a guest once on Unfound. And hello, Natasha. Welcome. And happy to always collaborate, especially with Unfound, and be helpful with various things, though certainly not as much as the other team members. Again, my usual disclaimer, my views expressed tonight do not necessarily represent those of my employing institution. So we're almost done with the pregame here, about 2 minutes to go. Again, we do this just to make sure our tech's in order, to get some of the material going, to maximize the time that we have. And again, folks will start joining us. We're starting tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll have some folks joining us. And as folks know, I get started right on the clock because, of course, that time is important and we want to move forward on that. Of course, I'll mention while Natasha's here, and I mentioned this a lot in the Time to Review episode. I'll mention it again just with a little bit of that time left in the pregame. very helpful in the forward movement and formation and direction of the Unfound on the Ground series. Again, we're at number 31. And so we got just about under a minute here. And so, again, if you're watching this after it's released, again, we usually have the pregame as part of this. And then we get going. And that pregame is usually 5 to 10 minutes at most, but it's important for the forward movement. And so here we are. It's 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. I'm coming to you now from North Dakota. And so, again, this is episode number 31, Unfound on the Ground, the disappearance of Olga Mauger. And again, thanks to the Jake Nichols article from the Cowboy State Daily for clarifying the pronunciation. Looks like Mauger. We're going to use his article. I sent that out to our think tank folks as a preliminary resource. I'm just going to get it out there on the chat stream now. Let me also use this time to get our disclaimers out there that we do wait till after pregame, and I have it in the text chat too. We've been doing these from the start. I know it seems a little bit tedious, but it's necessary, right? This episode number 31 is recorded, video and audio, including the text chat. Chat participation's an option for those think tank folks and other guests that join us for the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound. The audio and video recording, including text chat, of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound. By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the rendering of your words for journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. So again, this topic tonight, again, it's one of these older cases, which, as folks know, I tend to take an interest in. And of course, it does provide, it's yet another case that provides another a good case study in terms of thinking through a case, and if one were to do the research and to understand it and to raise awareness about it, the sorts of things that we're interested here in the Unfound universe, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to share here, and again, as a resource, again, this is the 31st episode, and I'm really going to do this playlist. This is the previous Unfound on the Ground episodes. I think a really good resource. And from episode 1, and again, I've had my ups and downs as a host. And again, thanks to feedback from Ed and other people. But one thing I can say for sure, and this is thanks to the team and Ed and participants, think tanks, right? It's been substantive. Hello, Kathy. It's been substantive. There's substantive material there, resources, various references, and so forth that are discussed. The case is from Wyoming, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And so I'm going to primarily rely on this Jake Nichols article, Cowboy State Daily. I'm pretty sure this is how I learned of this case, as I was talking with Ed. And again, thanks to Ed too, just for some communication about the case. He did suggest some themes and questions to think through. So the date here to keep in mind is September 17th, 1934. That's when Olga Mauger, again, it looks like Mauger, but it's Mauger, disappeared. And so, of course, I'm in North Dakota, as many of you know who watch this or keep up. And so, Wyoming's just not too far away, especially I'm in western North Dakota. I'm not as familiar with Wyoming. And again, we have Kathy and Natasha here, and I'll keep up on the chat too. And so this is really a good overview. And just a note on this too, a couple things. Again, I know we always, let me give the usual disclaimer. We know that there are ups and downs to the use of Wikipedia. It doesn't necessarily have adequate editorial review, but because people discuss it, we usually just mention it as on our list of resources that are out there that people use. Interestingly, for this one, as far as I can tell, there is no Wikipedia entry for. We do have, of course, one of our go-tos. There is a Charlie Project entry for it, which I'll post here. And then I saw from there that Megan Good had the flag there, or a signal over to the NamUs database, and here is the link for that. And so if this is a case that you want to raise some awareness about, you certainly have some landing pages there that you can use. I want to, I've met, we've covered the Marvin Clark case before. And again, we have these older cases and other ones as well. There is, although I think this article is the most recent and most comprehensive that I can tell. I don't want to say there's no coverage of it out there. There is some, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that through the decades. But again, I think this is a case that folks like us, we can help to raise awareness. So even the Charlie Project page or the NamUs page can be helpful for raising that awareness. And so keep that in mind. So back to the article by Nichols, again, cowboystatedaily.com, September 2023. So September 17th, 1934, you had a newly married couple. And of course, these, we'll talk a little bit here soon about this part of Wyoming. So imagine a very outdoor oriented area and people who are very outdoor oriented. And they're on a honeymoon, they're newlyweds, and they're at a place that today is known as Togwotee Mountain Lodge. And they were out there on a honeymoon where they were hunting elk. And so again, Olga Mauger, right? Nichols clarifies the pronunciation. This is something that she would have been, at least according to Nichols, inclined to do. And she was knowledgeable about the area. What I found interesting here that I learned, and again, I'll combine, to help maximize our time, we have our usual guiding questions here. What do we know about the disappearance? What don't we know? What are some of those areas of study? And then, of the various methods, tools, avenues that we've discussed over these episodes, what might we be able to employ if one wanted to research the case further? So here again, according to Nichols, Olga was born in South Dakota. And what he mentioned there, interestingly, he says that her parents were German ancestry, but were from Eastern Russia, which just we talk about culture. When I moved to North Dakota back in 2006, not long after that, I lived in Bismarck for approximately 4 years and then moved to the western side of the state in Dickinson. I had learned about an ethnic cultural group that I never knew about, which you'll hear is Germans from Russia. I should have maybe provided some information. I know there's a society or a group or two in the area. But so basically what you're talking about, I'm certainly not an expert on the Germans from Russia, but basically Germanic people who spent time in parts of Eastern Europe and then for certain political or logistical reasons eventually were leaving that area and then came to places like North Dakota, South Dakota, so forth. And so I found that interesting here that looks like that Olga and her family were, um, looks like in that group based on what's here, for sure. That was interesting. And so the groom, Carl Mauger, excuse me, Carl Major. Okay, so they were out and about, and they were moving forward, and they were, and Carl had said, "Hey, let's climb this hill, this small hill," and of course they're on the lookout for elk. And Olga basically said, "Hey, I'm going to take a rest. You go ahead. You go ahead." And you know that. And just to quote Nichols here, right? Carl thought it strange, but again, Olga was an outdoors person, and so Carl was going forward, and he turned around to check on his wife, and then. According to Nichols, there she sat on a rock within hearing distance of passing cars on Togwotee Pass Road, and that was built in 1921, according to Nichols. She had on her a small hatchet, and she had some sandwiches. And so Carl would return to that area, and when he was in communication with the authorities, it would have been about 20 minutes, according to him, and Olga was gone. And so, again, according to Nichols here, depending on what accounts and reports that were there, what was left behind, were there sandwiches, were there not sandwiches, but that was it. Right. And so she was missing from that point forward. And yeah, so Kathy has mentioned here the whirlwind romance. Right. We're going to soon get into Ella here shortly. That gets into interesting aspects of it. So basically, of course, Nichols gets into the search, and there was a lot of search, and I'll mention a little bit about some of my newspaper scans on this. And there was nothing, right? Nothing was being turned up. And this is, and I'm not as much of an expert on Wyoming, but I know a little bit about it, and certainly I can tell you from North Dakota and what little bit I know about South Dakota. Depending on where you're at in these areas, searching is going to be a lot of variation in difficulty for various reasons. And so, that it can certainly has its challenge, for sure. And there was a lot of visibility to this, and that's clear from when you go back. Interestingly, too, and this is mentioned in the article, I also found a document on the U.S. Forest Service website, Department of Agriculture, and I have this PDF. I'll share the link. I wasn't able to find specific identifying information about what the specific document is, but it's obviously someone was doing history of the area or the region. And if you search the document for Mauger, Mauger, but properly pronounced Major, you'll see, and of course Nichols mentions in there that even Civilian Conservation Corps people, CCC, had even assisted with the search, and there's a mention of that in this document, and that was interesting. It just mentioned these various things these folks were doing. And it said, and helped in searching for lost persons, including Olga Major. And then there is in the footnote of that some overview of the case, which of course would be important, sort of if you were going to dig more deeply. Obviously, this Nichols clearly did pretty good journalistic work. Now, I will mention, if you are going to dig into this case, and as we know, even when you have good work, it makes good sense to align with, just kind of take a big picture look and work back and then work forward, kind of see what's out there in terms of informational alignments over the decades. Obviously, there's things people don't know, but sometimes in reporting, what kind of consistencies, inconsistencies, again, as we've talked about many times, and going back to conversations as we know I've had with Ed, and I can't remember if it was discussed when I was a guest, but just that there's many times where even well-meaning, people are sharing inaccurate information. Now, again, I'm not saying that's happening with the Nichols article, but, it's just a matter of sort of seeing what's out there in a sort of media scan. This Nichols article is very thorough, so it's helpful along those lines. So basically, you could build from items in this article. Of course, always check, double check, and then you can sort of use this to expand and springboard from. Although, again, this article provides a very good overview. And so, as Kathy has mentioned, right, we have another dimension to this, which is important, and I'll continue here with Nichols, is so Carl was in the oil business, and so as if you know, just in this region, in various phases, right, there's been oil, just like now in this region, and so Carl had been dating a woman. Her name, and again, thanks to Nichols for providing a pronunciation, Ella Tikash. And so they had been dating, and Ella was asking consistently, for that period of time, 5 or 6 years, hey, let's get married. But Carl was saying, hey, we'll he's putting her off basically, and talking about, again, according to Nichols, financial stability. But at some point, when they were to dance, of course, Carl spotted Olga. And so from that, basically, that's when that whirlwind romance, right, that Kathy mentioned, started. And so they were married in Nebraska on September 11th. So things clearly moved fairly quickly. And so Ella kind of stepped aside. And according to Nichols, Olga's sister, and her name's Edith Thompson, later would say that after the marriage, Ella sent a letter, right, where she said, "Hey, I'm going to commit suicide." And of course, there was this sense, and this is coming from Olga's sister back then, or at least it was reported as such, that maybe Olga was having some second thoughts, right, in terms of this, even to the point where Olga requested her sister, "Hey, why don't you come with us?" With, of course, that's out of the ordinary, and that Olga's sister obviously was picking up, something's not right here. So, of course, as Nichols mentions here, you're going to get into some varying reports, but there are some things that one could go by. There was this question about, was Ella going to commit suicide? Did she have that idea that she was going to commit suicide? To what extent did Olga have, apprehensions about the situation she was in? And so, would that be something that, she's going to express to her new husband? Or is this just something that she's going to, on her own, sort of get out of Dodge? According to Nichols, she was a stenographer, and so it wasn't as if she didn't have job opportunities potentially. And of course, there was the idea that her sister, Edith Thompson, thinking someday that she would get a letter from her sister Olga, but that didn't happen. And so that obviously leaves a lot of things on the table that we don't know and would speculate about. And so, as the more we find things that are paths or maybe possibly answers or some leads, so to speak, it raises more questions. So, in my mind, and again, I'm not taking a position on this per se. I mean, I think there's some plausible scenarios here, right? The one, of course, and again, thanks to Ed for some communication on this. And then I thought through some of this, and then I thought, well, what about this? What about this? And I'm sure Kathy and Natasha have some thoughts. So I think this is a case where there is I don't want to say strong, but a distinct possibility that with Olga being, again, as Nichols indicates, someone who's an outdoor person, an astute with the land, so to speak, and seemingly someone who has some ruggedness to her. And if she was certainly apprehensive about moving forward in this marital relationship, it's very possible that she went on the run. And if she had, now this is an area too, though, where even if you have that sort of knowledge and experience, that's not a guarantee of survival. But she seems like she's someone who would have known that. And so that said, there is that possibility that she went on the run and she found a way to keep going. And so is this a case of someone who chose to disappear and felt that if I'm going to do this, I really got to do this. And so, she went far away and resurfaced somewhere and changed her name or didn't change her name. Keep in mind, this is not 2024. This isn't even 1994 or 1984, right? They're finding, even if you disappear voluntarily and don't change your name, it's going to be very different in terms of having any sort of footprint. Now, that's not that there is no footprint or no paperwork or no way. So would she have changed her name and so forth? Then, of course, the other scenario, right, that's on the table more distinctly, or some might even say in this case more strongly, and please share your thoughts, Kathy, Natasha, is, did she have a conversation with Carl and say, look, we jumped into this and I'm just not really as enthused about this. And, all of a sudden something happened, right? Did Carl lose his cool on that? And then did he murder her? Of course so if there was a murder, what happened to the body? Right now, I'm not a wildlife expert, but it would seem to me, and of course, if one were going to dig deeply on something like this, right? If you're thinking forensically and journalistically, you'd want to kind of think through this a little bit. If someone was murdered, even with some attempt to dispose of the body, wouldn't there be some remains at some point, possibly? And I'm, based on what I've seen and what Nichols recounts and what's some of the other material looking back, with the thoroughness and visibility of this, you would think there would be something along those lines. That doesn't, no body though doesn't mean no murder. So I don't want to say that, hey, that's the reason to take it off the table. But that certainly raises questions. Kathy, I considered that she ran off, but don't buy it for one main reason. She never contacted her sister again. That is a very good consideration. Let's use that as an opportunity to keep going. So, as I said, according to Nichols, their sister never did get that letter. Of course, one possibility with that is that she did run off. She waited a while to write, and through natural causes, or not, had something else happen to her. But I can see that if she, lived for a period of time, and this was 1934, and according to Nichols, let's see here, did we get her exact birthday? Oh, that would be on one of the name sites. Let me just, for some reason I didn't. Let me go right to Charlie Project, open link in a new tab. Yeah, just to get a perspective on age. She was born in 1913, so she wasn't, she had a lot of life ahead of her. So if she did go on the run, assuming she lived for a while, it makes sense that she would have reached out to someone, for sure. So after Olga vanished, and Carl did get a divorce. This would have been 7 years after, and remarried Ella. So we're back to Ella. They moved to California. According to Nichols, Carl died in 1978, and Ella lived to 1998. So, they had a life together. And so, again, as Nichols states here, Olga Schultz Major had simply vanished. And again, just for public informational purposes here, this is helpful in terms of this article, sharing this article too, that the National Missing and Identified Person System, NamUs, asked the Fremont County Sheriff's Office to get a file going on the disappearance. So it is, at least as of the writing of this article, September 2023, the oldest missing person case officially in the records of the state of Wyoming. And he lists at this time a Detective Jason Cox, 307 332 5611. 307 332 5611. So let's go here. Kathy, rugged wilderness, searchings often miss remains. True. Natasha, if running away, I would wait until back home where there was access to public transportation, trains. Taking off on a hike seems to be hard. Very good point. Again, even if someone is rugged, they're used to the outdoors, that would also mean they know the risks, right? Which then this gets us into some deeper considerations about this whole situation, right? That we could think about as sort of our set of research questions if you were to dig into this. If she would have been picked up by someone, right? And again, thanks to Ed for prompting some of these considerations. Why wouldn't that driver come forward, right? And again, for the sake of fair use here, I went through the Nichols article and quoted some and paraphrased a lot and didn't get into every single detail. But if one possibility is that someone picked her up and helped in that endeavor, or if someone would have seen her, again, back to Natasha, on a train, and so forth. Like, why did any of these people come forward, right? If someone picked her up, and then they took her somewhere where she could travel further, what automobile would have been available, or wagon and horse in those days, or took her in for a while, right? Why didn't anyone like credible or verifiably come forward with this sort of thing. That's interesting. Let's see, Kathy, some of the narrative is Carl's story only. Good point. Did they really go hiking for miles that morning? He could have easily misled law enforcement where they hiked and pushed her off a cliff and shot her and threw her off. That's a great point. We are relying on more on his side of what seems to be at least a strong, aspect of what we see as in a historical record. That's an important consideration. Also, right, if Olga was apprehensive about marrying Carl, and obviously we it's very difficult to dig into these, but these are important questions. Why did she? Of course, we could have that discussion about being an exciting situation and getting swept up and then having second thoughts, and what are those opportunities and difficulties to say, hey, let's slow it down here before we get married. That's, of course, I also would have the question from the other point of view, if Carl is oil man and, and he was dragging his feet at this point or that time with Ella, why move so quickly with Olga? Kathy, that's a very good question. I had briefly thought about that. Did her family have money? Now, when I read in the Nichols article that he was in oil, of course, we tend to think about oil and money at various levels of people who work in oil. I mean, even the guys who do the hard work, as they should, get paid well. But there are also ups and downs in the oil business. And I would, if we were going to study this, it would be interesting to dig back through the materials and see where things were economically for him, and then what sort of financial means did her parents have, and did she have, and what did she have access to? Of course, we'd have to ask the other side of that. Was this something in terms of Olga sort of getting swept up in this? Kathy, it sounded like he still had feelings for Ella. That's true. I agree with that, right? In terms of a summary or an important thought to think about, for sure. I found, and this is from newspapers.com. Again, this is a subscription database, so that's up to you whether you want to subscribe to that or not. I think it's I'll send the link, but you really can't access it unless you have a subscription. Or so, and this is from 1974, September 22nd, right? So we're looking at almost 50 years ago. I was born in July 10th, 1974. So it says in memoriam, and this is from the Casper Star Tribune, in memory of our sister Olga Schultz Major, who disappeared 40 years ago near Togwotee Pass above Du Bois. And that's Edith M. Thompson and Walter S. Schultz. So that adds some perspective. Of course, we never want to forget, as we don't forget on the Unfound platforms, the human element of these cases. And so that's something, as I was looking back at the coverage of this case over the decades in different phases. Natasha, Ella has the motive, but I don't think Ella just happened to be on the side of the road for abduction. Of course, though, in terms of the emotionality of all this, and the sort of whirlwind notion and the second thoughts, and the idea about the possibility of, hey, I'm thinking of suicide here. That adds aspects to the mix that get us thinking about the human element, if indeed that's true, but could be a factor here. Kathy, I agree, Natasha. I don't think Ella had any involvement in Olga going missing. Okay. We do have here, again, through the decades, obviously, if you go back on these newspaper searches, whether you're using Google News Archive, and I do want to share that link because there are some articles available from years ago that would give some of that perspective. So I'm just going to share that link with you here, and you'll see just some of those, particularly from the early 20th century, from the 30s forward. Get that here for you. But again, on newspaper.com, you're going to have more. Again, that's newspapers.com is a subscription database. And so, if we were going to research the case, work back in time and then forward in time, the Nichols piece is a good walk back, and then start to look at some of that coverage, right? So we want to look and see what details. Obviously, there's going to be some varying reports. There may be some things that are open questions. Here's a question, too, to consider, right? If Ella's out there, and whether it was Carl was going to do something, or let's say that she went on the run and then someone else did something, say an abduction or whatnot, or an attack. This hatchet that she had, right? And this is a rugged woman here, right? Could that have been a factor of protection? Now, that's not a guarantee, but that's an interesting consideration. What does that do in thinking about those possibilities? And then if she did want to run off, why not run off at a different time, say in the middle of the night or some other more opportune time? Why do it there? Now, of course, if you go sort of within the relationship, right, maybe she had a sense of this would be a better time, but that's a reasonable question also. And again, you can say, look, Carl has we have some short list of motives, but this is a pretty serious business, right? He's just going to kill his new wife within not many days after marrying her. And I don't know, maybe he went off the edge if she told her, hey, look, this just isn't for me. But on the other hand, in some ways that could be perceived as a big leap, a big risk, something to think about. As we know, also, it's good to kind of get to know the area. I've not been really in this part of Wyoming in terms of really being in it. And so if you want to get to know Wyoming, Du Bois, Wyoming, there's a nice piece here from YouTube, 2018 posted, Wyoming PBS. And so I'll put that out there. Let's go for Kathy. Kind of far-fetched if Olga ran off and then ran into someone who murdered her. I don't disagree as we think out loud, so to speak, about that. It would be easy for Carl to kill her in these mountains. Absolutely. In a certain sense, based knowing what we know and knowing what we don't know, that tends to be sort of toward the top of our consideration. So I see that. And I also have here just a basic Google search. If you want to, I'll share the search string if you want to see more about Du Bois area in general. That's interesting. For sure. I do think, though, that let me just spend time with this idea. Again, if one were researching this. So first of all, I think this is a case we need to raise awareness about. And yes, this episode's part of doing that. And again, Credit here to Jake Nichols, Cowboy State Daily, cowboystatedaily.com, September 2023, for getting this case out there with this much thoroughness. We got the Namus page, we got Charlie Project, get those links out there. But digging into this, if one were to dig into this, right? And here we go, right? Genealogy, of course, going back through the materials and looking at the Nichols article, right? Aspects of that work has been done. But if you're really going to determine, did she go on the run? Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, she went on the run. She lived another life. She met someone else. She got married. Of course, if she did, well, to the point where, and I'm talking from a legal perspective, to the point where Carl eventually got the divorce, right? From the time that she went on the run until the point where he got the divorce. Of course, she wouldn't have been able to legally marry elsewhere. But let's just say that that wasn't on her mind, and maybe it happened after he got the divorce. Or maybe she doesn't marry, but she gets involved with someone else, maybe has a child, a few children. Could there be descendants out there? Now, the point that Kathy, I think, raised earlier, as people move on and they wonder too, like if she had children, like who's my family? Or if Olga really had, why wouldn't Olga reach out at some point to her sister? Now, maybe she thought it was too risky and so forth. But it would be interesting and fascinating to see, right, is this the case of a long lost relative? And not that people haven't been looking and doing that, but could it be over time with research and records and even, I don't know in this case, and I haven't thought deeply about this and looked into it. Obviously, descendants would have to be, broader family descendants would have to be a part of this in the DNA databases, right? Someone comes forward and says, I'm descended from Olga Mauger, but that's, I know that in a sense you can say, how reasonable is that? But that is an interesting and fascinating consideration, especially as some of you know, right, in terms of my main hobby and how I try to think about this in terms of cold cases, right, the broader genealogical question. And again, you can see some of that clearly is not groundbreakingly new for this case. Let's go back here to Natasha. Olga could have been sitting there alone for the first time on break, and then she could have just hitched a ride. Second thoughts on getting married. Kathy, I think Olga regretted marrying Carl right away. Maybe he was a cad. Natasha, I don't think they were married that long for huge problems to creep up yet. Again, these are all fair considerations, right? Looking back. Kathy, it sounded like Olga was fearful of Carl to ask her sister about accompanying them on their elk hunting honeymoon. That's an interesting thought. I mean, the thought about like that, it's like out of the ordinary. But then would she have even asked? That's a good question. Yeah, of course, the other issue here is, even if you're saying, she got killed by a bear or some sort of cat, mountain lion, whatever. And I'd want to know the wildlife a little more from those days. I'm just thinking out loud here. Again, it would seem to me plausible. There would have been some sort of remains. Of course, that doesn't take off the table that possibility, right? For sure. Again. So again, if there was some sort of discussion between them two during the honeymoon that was awkward, distressful, saddening, angering, and if Carl did murder her, right? And then, of course, quote unquote crime of passion, or maybe, what was he like? We don't, we know what we know, and we know certain things that, yes, Kathy, tend to favor his perspective. But then, wait it out for Ella. That practically looks feasible for him in terms of, well, I don't want to rush to marry Ella because then I'll look more guilty. And, is she going to not go anywhere anyway? And if she was that distraught over him, she'll wait it out. That's something to consider. Kathy, it sounded like Olga was fearful. Oh, right, I mentioned that. Sorry, right. Fearful about asking, can her sister accompany? So, I think certainly in some ways with difficulty, and again, thanks to Ed for some insights on this too. And again, thanks to this great conversation here with Kathy and Natasha. I think in some ways, there's aspects of this case that could still be on the path to solvable, right? Of course, because of the human element and the people and the narrative, the story, that still needs to be told no matter what. But there's still something about this case, even with this passage of time, right? Even this many years, right? Going back to the 1930s. Kathy, if an animal got her, you'd think there would be remnants of clothes or her boots, for example. Then he marries Ella not too long after Olga went missing, right? That's a good consideration. So, is this a situation where Carl was basically able to get away with a murder? And then because of the unfortunate reality of his story in that case being predominant, being able to hold up through the pressures of trying not to be found out, maybe certain circumstantial factors go his way in terms of the wilderness and other things. And then over time, it just got to the point where a case wasn't able to be made, or other things came up, this would be a whole nother spin-off of research, sort of how connected, how influential was Carl, or people that Carl knew locally. I'm just asking that. I don't know anything about that, but I would have that on my list to discourage or cover up further investigation. Just a thought. Again, questions lead to questions. That's how it's supposed to be. If you also have any other research suggestions, please let me know. One thing for sure, I alluded to here a few times, I would want to, and I have a sense of where to look. Just being from the region, of course, there are federal as well as state resources, as well as some of those old newspaper articles and so forth, right? Historical material, academic, popular, journalistic, so forth, right? Some of the conditions, some of the weather. I know here Nichols says at one point that there was that impeded one of the search efforts. Let's see here. An early season snowstorm cut short such efforts, and so that's something to consider. And then going through some of those older articles from the 30s forward, just to see how that ongoing discussion of the case and to what extent did people return to the area, and obviously this unfortunately becomes part of the ongoing history of the region, for sure. Kathy, only the lunch bag was found, and that could have been easily planted after he got rid of her remains in an area hard to access. Yeah, and again, some to Nichols, some reports vary on some things, but let's just say for the discussion that was the case. Yeah, he could have planted that. Right? He could have murdered her with her own hatchet. I mean, God, we don't want to get morbid here, and we're not into sensationalism, but when you're thinking through the immorality of the possibility of something like that, then how did he carry it out, right? And he had options, unfortunately. He had options in thinking through that. Kathy, they had rifles with them, right? The obvious there, right? And so that was a possibility. I'd want to look and see, and if I missed anything in Nichols' article on this, my apologies. As I identify that there are various old articles, I'd want to dig into those and see if there's any other materials out there, and I'd want to look and see in terms of books that might have dealt with some of this over the years. Are there any old records? And maybe Nichols consulted some of these. And if you did an open records request on historical law enforcement material, right? What case files? So what sort of forensic investigations were done? For instance, did law enforcement say to him, can we take a look at your gun? Now, obviously, I know that the technology and the methodologies and so forth have developed in some way since those days. So I can't just impose, that they would have had that. That doesn't mean they were any less intelligent than we were. It was just a different, those capabilities weren't there. But, there were, what would there be? Maybe I would consult someone I know broadly who's a historian or a criminologist and so forth to see, hey, how would one think through this, right? Collaboration is key, academically, journalistically, so forth. So this is an important case, as we can see. And again, if there's anything else you want to cover, we still have about 10 minutes, so please type it up. This is great, Natasha, Kathy, on going through this. This is going to provide, as we do, great content for people. So again, we've just to start slowly summarizing here, Unfound on the Ground number 31. We have episode 31. This is the disappearance of Olga Mauger. We relied primarily on the Nichols article, 2023, and I shared the link on that for an overview. I've mentioned some other source material that's out there. Again, methodologically, one could sort of start with this and then sort of springboard from it, note some things, note some questions. We've covered a range, and then walk it back and then walk it forward. The genealogy angle is interesting to me. I'd want to see what's been done with that over the years. And it's just something you can keep sort of moving forward with. Kathy, he could have also tossed the murder weapon very easily, of course, there. Whether it was a gun or her hatchet, or God forbid, a big stick, a stone, right? Just get it out of there. I think this was a planned murder, not second degree. Okay, so the idea of a crime of passion is not what you're saying here. This was premeditated. So that adds another scenario to this. There's a possibility. Again, I'm not taking an official position on this. But as a possibility, wow. Right? That's one. And I was thinking more of that crime of passion angle. Right? So no, this is something that he planned. Whether they ever had the talk, to what extent that he sensed something was up, to what extent he might have had second thoughts, to what extent he might have been thinking about Ella, to what extent he might have been thinking about whatever other things. Of course, they were both people that were inclined to the outdoors. He knew that. Such a honeymoon is a trap, so to speak. Let's go elk hunting. Or, hey, they had planned it and we're going to be out there. So, that's interesting. Premeditated. Which, again, he knows that he can control the narrative after that. Right. The crime of passion would probably be back in their lodging, not out of the woods. That's very good. That's very good. So that adds another one to the list. And I guess one we didn't discuss much. Certainly it's indicated as a possibility in the Nichols article. Did she commit some sort of, did Olga commit some sort of suicide? She went on the run. But again, the challenge for that remains. Now, again, you'd have to really deeply go into this, get to know that terrain a little bit more, study that. Unfortunately, there are different ways that someone could commit suicide out there. There are challenges with that, though. There are challenges with, in terms of that being the case, discovering that. Because I would, again, not being a scientist, and would need to think through this and maybe even consult someone who understands wildlife more, like, to what extent is someone just completely disappear, completely eaten, completely dispersed, where there'd be no remains? Kathy, not likely in your opinion. Probably agree with you. I wouldn't take it off the list, but I would put it down on the list. But just as a matter of navigating through this, as I said to a colleague earlier when I was saying, hey, I got this case discussion tonight, right, where we sort deeply through these things, just in general and Unfound, but for this sort of case, just grappling with the rhetoric and the dialectic of it. So we keep these things on that, right, and keeping that classical notion of dialectic on the table in terms of analysis and argumentation. Not likely, I agree, Natasha, and I do too, but just in terms of having that on the list, for sure, is something to consider. So again, great job, folks. When this episode is released, within about a month, we'll be out there. People will be watching it. If you're watching this video, please consider liking it if you're inclined to do so. And if you're not yet a subscriber to the Unfound Podcast Channel, go ahead and subscribe if you do subscribe to channels on YouTube. And then when it's out there being distributed, go ahead and share the video if you're someone that likes to share material on social media or email and so forth. Kathy, it didn't seem like she was depressed. Just wanted to get out of her quick marriage. I think that's a good point, right? Which would then also keep pushing that suicide down the list. You get the sense, and I just say this very tentatively because there's so much more to understand about this, but our discussion has helped. She's someone, a rugged woman, knew her way around outside, had life in front of her. Why would she end it? You're welcome, Natasha, and thank you. Why would she end it? Why would she end it? That's a good point. So great job, folks. Again, I'm going to say what I always say, and I think in this case, it still could be applicable. Someone out there knows something or knows someone who knows something, and maybe in the case of genealogy and the forward movement of families, or I don't know, even someone who's no longer alive, maybe someday some sort of letter or postcard or some other artifact will be discovered. But until that time, let's continue to raise awareness about this case. Let's continue to talk about it. And right now, it's really good. It's important to raise awareness as such. It does provide for a helpful case study. In doing that, encouraging people to share what we've shared and to read what we've read and maybe do more research. And again, let me mention one more time again, the unfoundpodcast.com, the unfoundpodcast.com for all things Unfound. And again, Kathy and Natasha, thank you. Have a great week. And to anyone watching this video, be well and have a great day and a great week on your end. And again, this concludes Unfound on the Ground number 31. the disappearance of Olga Mauger. Thank you, folks. And again, thanks to you, Kathy. Good night. And Natasha, and you're welcome. And be well. And I'm now ending the stream.